What are some unexplainable events or phenomenon that you've observed in real life? Tide comes in. Tides go out. Never a miscommunication. Amazing. How does it work? When I was 17, my girlfriend's mother was convinced I was a demon. Preying on this, I walked into the kitchen one day. Upon seeing her, I pointed at the lighting fixture, said boo, and the light burned out in a flash. She jumped, screamed, and commanded me out of her house. Funny moment. It was around 3-4 in the morning, and I woke up in the middle of the night per usual, as a teen. I probably woke up in my bed 4-5 times a night every night. Half asleep. I look at the clock to see what time it is. It's around 3:30 am. I then look at my doorway across the room and realize that my door is open. And there in the darkness I make out a silhouette of a person standing there facing me in the middle of the doorway. At first I think it's my dad or grandfather, as sometimes they get up a lot, and I caught my grandfather watching me sleep a couple times. Creepy. I know. But that's for another time. A few seconds pass, and I start to freak out. I stop believing it's anyone in the house. And the moment I scrutinize it further, the silhouette runs towards my bed with its arms flailing. I am proverbially sheeting my pants at this point, and I just shut my eyes out of fear. Open them after another few seconds, and see nothing there. I closed the door, turned the light on, and watched TV for the rest of the night. Two really strange things. One supernatural. One just unexplained. Black triangle UFO story. When I was about 22 I walked out of my house to check the mail at dusk. The mailbox was across the street and behind the mailbox was a steep hill which went down into a deep valley with a river, so checking the mail provided a pretty sweeping panoramic view of a large area. As I crossed the street I noticed this huge black thick triangle in the sky. It looked very similar to this. And I mean gigantic. It's hard to estimate the size of things in the sky, but I'd guess it was the size of a football field. Now we had lots of air traffic in this valley, so I know what airplanes and other flying vehicles looked like and sounded like. The eerie thing about this big triangle craft was that it was totally silent and was moving way too slow to be flying conventionally. It was just creeping along. I stood there dumbfounded for about 10 minutes as it ever so slowly moved across the valley and behind some trees. I don't think it was an alien craft, but it was definitely an unidentified craft. Ghost story. About 10 years ago my mom was on vacation and I drove the hour to her house and stayed over one night so I could take care of the place and do a few chores while she was gone. She had moved into the place about 2 years before and I had never stayed the night there before. I was the only one in the house, so I made dinner, watched TV and went to bed. Totally normal stuff. I should note here that my mom is a huge clutter junkie. She has knickknacks out the wazoo covering every surface in her house. Anyway, when I woke up in the morning everything from the mantle over her living room fireplace, probably 24 knickknacks, was on the floor arranged in a perfect circle. I was so ducking confused. I felt funny about telling anyone about it, but I called my mom and told her, and she said that it had happened occasionally ever since she moved in but had never told anyone. She said it happened in different rooms sometimes, but it was always just a playful rearrangement of stuff. She said she called it teaser. The fact that she had a name for it creeped me out. She still lives in the house but reports that over the years it started slowing down and now doesn't happen anymore. I don't really believe in ghosts but have no explanation for this at all. When I was a kid, like first grade, I had knowledge of people and events that I should not have had. I knew where people lived that my parents didn't know. I knew their names and such. My parents told me I would start out stories by saying a long time ago when I was an old man. I don't believe in any of this bullshit. But that's a strange thing for a 2-year-old to say. I must have heard it somewhere. There was a period of 4 months where I continually saw the numbers 1111 multiple times a day. Every day. I know what you're saying, that's not weird. I've looked at the clock and seen 1111. Yeah, but that's not it. I saw it everywhere. Not on clocks but signs. License plates. Everywhere. It stopped after the 4 months, but it was a really weird time for me. I once saw this book about vampires or some shit that read like it was written in a Backstreet Boys notebook by an illiterate and loved emo high school girl in the back of a sophomore math class. Then I found out this book was wildly popular. Not only among teen girls but among many intelligent well-read women I know. And that it had been auctioned for multiple movies. Themselves also wildly successful. Needless to say, I was baffled. And could not even begin to explain it. I'm not saying it was definitely a deal with the devil, or some equally supernatural shit. But it really makes you think. One time in high school I was testing the waters before I was going to bed. While listening to music, I was getting into paranormal stuff at that time, and I got enough courage to say, if anyone is here, give me a sign. Right after I finished that, my music turned to static, then became louder. At this point in time I was freaking out and paralyzed with fear. After a few seconds, which felt like 20, I said stop out loud, and just like before, it stopped right when I told it to. Can't really explain it, but I've never tried anything like that again. This is reposted, but here goes. So this was back in 2006 when I was 16 and worked at a chain pretzel shop at my local mall. Now, this is during the dead afternoon days of the summer. Usually there would just be one person manning the satellite store, as there was the main one upstairs and the satellite store downstairs. I took care of both the satellite pretzel store and the ice cream store that was attached to it. At this particular time, I'm that one person. The day was going by pretty slowly, and with no windows. Time would often stand still. The cameras where the upstairs store could watch us at all time made it pretty hard to text people and to have any distractions. Regardless, at some unknown time, a family of 3, mother, daughter, and young son, stop some distance from the counter and stare at me and the pretzels. I would not have thought it to be odd except for how they were dressed. They looked like they came straight out of the 1950s. Like this. The son was much younger and was in 1950s style clothing as well. I'm thinking how weird this could possibly be. But then realized that right upstairs there was a professional photoshoot franchise. So they were probably dressed up for some photos. It was not until the little boy came up to the counter and asked for a pretzel. I told him the price. $2.66. And he handed me a $1 bill. I motioned to the mother that the pretzel cost $2.66 and he was $1.66 short. She looked at me like I told her the pretzel cost $10. Because I understand that almost $3 for a pretzel is high. However, she looked at me as if I wanted her to fork over her life savings. The little boy, not talking, hands me the dollar. I take a hard stare at it and realize it's a silver certificate. Series 1957. And this dollar bill did not look like it was 49 years old. It had normal wear and tear like a Series 2003 bill had at the time. It wasn't crisp, but it was still very much usable and a bank would probably use it for further transactions. At this point I realized that nobody else really crossed their paths the entire time. And the music media store next door was pretty dead. Even for a midsummer afternoon. While pedestrian traffic just seemed to not exist. I hand the dollar back to the boy. And he walks away with his mother and sister. I didn't see them afterward and nobody was witness to this account. After constant prodding, I was finally able to look at the cameras looking towards the satellite store. I was obviously talking to customers. But the camera was angled so that you couldn't see any of them. TLDR, time traveling family. One night, a couple of years ago, I was in my room. Having gone to bed at an unseasonably early hour. I was living in my parents' house at the time. But I was the only one there. As I was drifting to sleep, I heard someone walking around downstairs and some rustling about. This was strange. Since I could have sworn I had set my house alarm. And I wasn't expecting anyone. I was too tired to investigate. So in my mind I told myself that maybe one of my sisters was coming home or my grandparents were staying over. I'm sure my mom had mentioned it. But it's rare that I listen to her drone on and on about whatever banality she had called me about that day. I listened to the noises long enough to decide that whomever was there wasn't stealing anything. And probably wasn't a threat. The next day, I woke up and stumbled into the bathroom at about 8 AM to start my morning routine. As I lifted the toilet seat up, I found a giant turd that someone had clearly left sitting there for a few hours. And this thing. Man, this thing was huge. Baby arm huge. I dry heaved for a moment before I realized that not only was there a giant piece of sheet in my toilet, but no toilet paper as well. I did a quick wipe check to see if maybe I had started to sleep sheet with an amazing degree of accuracy. But it came back clean. I instantly went from confusion to outrage. Since this meant that whoever came into my house last night decided that they were familiar enough with my domicile to sheet in my bathroom and not even have the decency to flush. I barged into my sister's room to start yelling her awake. Only to find the bed empty and still freshly made. I went down the hall to my parents' room, figuring maybe she opted for the California King as opposed to paltry twin extra long. Same situation. Freshly made. Undisturbed. At this point, I'm thinking one of my grandparents was playing a strangely elaborate trick on me. Their bad hips prevent them from moving quickly up and down our curved staircase. So if either of them made use of my bathroom, it would have had to have been out of spite rather than necessity. I walked downstairs into our guest room to poke my head in and see if anyone was there. But no such luck. At this point, I'm completely befuddled. I go to the front door to see if there are any cars out front that I would recognize. But when I opened the door, the house alarm went off. I froze for a moment before closing the door, turning off the alarm, and spending the next 20 minutes in the shower trying to figure out how the phantom poo had arrived at its destination. TLDR, I have a ghost possible hobo that can walk through walls that chat in my bathroom. Posted before elsewhere on Reddit. But here it goes. So there is this creepy abandoned house that was supposedly haunted. People talked about it all the time in high school. A local cult used it for animal sacrifice and Satan worship. Or so the stories go. So a bunch of friends and I are hanging out at the local movie theater and someone brought it up. I had been to the road that lead to it. I got even close enough to see it once. But plenty of people had done that. Nobody had ever gone inside it though. Well, we start talking about it. And it wasn't long before we all pile in my Jeep and head towards it. We pull up to the little dirt road that turns off the main one. There is usually a gate there and we have to get out and go on foot. But not this time. We drive down the overgrown driveway, crowded by trees and ferns until we get to the second gate, which normally has a chain across it. But not this time. You can barely see the house in the background in that picture. There was a fair amount of development around the area. But this property had its own large clearing in the middle of a mini forest, which was very odd. I pull through the gate and up near it and get out with all my friends. There was some very disturbing graffiti on the carport next to the house that read "No mortals." Some of the girls get goosebumps at that and decide to get back in the car. But I pull out my flashlight and urge a few people to go inside with me. Come on. Why else did we come all this way? We knew it was going to be scary. That's the point. We step inside and the first thing we notice is the smell. It smells like old death and there are black marks all on the floor and walls where it looks like people have had some indoor fires. There is a pentagram drawn on one of the walls. Some of the floor is rotting away in different places. There is a narrow stairway going to the upper floor that looks very odd and out of place. One of the girls thinks she hears something upstairs, probably an animal, I think. But the homeless were also known to squat there. I managed to take one picture of the kitchen before my battery on my camera goes dead. At that moment I got some serious chills and one of the girls who was with me started totally freaking out. She starts screaming to leave and I felt a really strange shift in the air pressure or something. Her scream maybe. Lol, it was loud, and we book it outside to the car. I turn it on. throw it in reverse and start backing up. About 1/2 second later I hear a big crunch and a scraping sound. WTF, I turn my head and see nothing. We are still in the middle of the large open area. I get out and walk around behind my car. My back right tail light is smashed and there are scraping marks on my bumper. At the end of each scrape there is a puncture in the bumper. That is when I really freaked out. Standing at the back of my car I took a look around. There wasn't anything within 15 feet of my car. I even scanned the ground to see if something dug into my car then fell over. Nothing but dirt and random patches of grass. At that point I got in my car and got the hell out of there. I took this picture of the damage a few days later. I wanted to go back during the day and check it out. But about 2 weeks later the gates were back up. And about 2 weeks after that construction companies demolished the whole place and started clearing out the trees. So did an evil demon ghost wreck my car? I don't know. But something did. And whatever it was, it could move. Before I start, not my story, but my aunt's. Personally, I'm an atheist who doesn't believe there is a scientific explanation for paranormal activity and would try to attribute most of the stuff I'm about to explain as pure coincidence. However, I do place some trust in my aunt. She's a bright woman, a fellow atheist, and a family-renowned skeptic like myself. That being said, she is absolutely convinced of what happened in her home and recalls it like it was yesterday. I'll try and give details as best I can if anyone is curious. So my aunt lived up in coal country in PA but later moved to Harrisburg. It's a spooky place to begin with. At least in my humble opinion. There has been a fire burning under Centralia for 50 years. To this day, no one knows for sure how it started, and during the winter months you can see the steam seeping up from the ground. The fire ripped through the underground caverns of coal and the town cemetery. Eventually the population dwindled because of the safety hazards. Nothing remains except roads and, if I'm not mistaken, a handful of stubborn people. Anyway, on to the story. My aunt lived up there in coal country with her husband. The houses up there had basements dug into the ground where people would shovel coal into the furnace to warm the homes. Her home was somewhere over a large coal dig. That's another weird fact. People were never sure if miners were digging for coal under their land. Sometimes the ground in the backyards would simply buckle. The man she bought the home from had lost his wife in a tragic accident. She fell down those steep stairs to the coal furnace in the basement. Tragically, he died the same way. Fell to his death down those stairs and died alone. Incapacitated at the bottom. So, my aunt and her husband buy this place a few months later and immediately begin noticing odd things. Sometimes, they'd be outside hanging laundry on lines and the radios would randomly switch stations from low frequencies. Low frequencies had several stations my aunt enjoyed, to high frequencies, country. My aunt absolutely loathes country music. At night when the sun went down, the house would creak quite a bit and doors would be slammed around the house when no one was present. Whenever they went into the basement to store some things or clean up, this would get worse. Whenever they made alterations to the house, the oddities only multiplied. One day my aunt recognized these occurrences were having an effect on her mental well-being. They were driving her mad. So, she sat down with her husband and spoke to the man. This sounds weird to me as well. But she explained that they tried to drive a bargain with the old man who they thought haunted the house. They screamed out loud to the guy that they wouldn't make alterations to the house for a few months if he would go peacefully. After 7-8 months, he was gone. Several years later they sold that house after it pretty much collapsed in on itself near the spot where the man had died at the bottom of those stairs. Could have been the coal mining below the home causing instability. TLDR, my aunt lived in spooky coal country in a home that saw its previous owners die in the same spot in the same way. Haunted or not, some weird things happened that to this day are repeated as fact by my skeptical atheist aunt. Edit, tags. I'm glad you made this post because it gives me a chance to share a story. I've never had the opportunity to write about it. It is short and not very exciting, but I will never forget this moment. I must have been 6 or 7 years old. Very young. I was playing in our basement while my mother was ironing clothes. My older brother had some weights set up that he used. I remember standing over top of one of the dumbbells, looking at my mother. Out of nowhere something tugged the back of my shirt in a downward motion, right around my left shoulder blade. As if the tugger was a little bit shorter than me. It was a gentle tug. Not harmful. But very much real. I was so confused about what had happened. It stuck in my mind all these years. Now I watch Ghost Adventures. I heard a voice. At age 4. Tell me that my then unborn sibling would be a boy named Ian. I never told anyone about the name, but I told my parents to buy boy diapers and they did. A couple weeks later I had a brother named Ian. I have a brother named Ian who is 4 years younger than me.